action. So, Pete, tell us about your story.
All right. I was born on Gadigal land in Sydney, 1958. Salvation Army, Bethesda Hospital in Marrickville. Grew up in not quite the inner western suburbs, from Granville area, South Granville. Had a fairly normal childhood, I guess. Had a younger sibling. Had some speech problems. Always sort of felt a little bit isolated, lonely. Didn't quite feel like I fitted in, but just took a bit on the chin, I guess. Made my own entertainment. I had a high work ethic. Started selling newspapers, paper boy, blowing a whistle at 4:30 in the morning, and getting people out of bed, and made money out of tips. That was my first business. There's plenty more to come after that, but moved from that area into a rural area towards Camden, and ended up becoming an apprentice mechanic. I guess earlier on in my childhood, I was a goody two shoes. I didn't get in that much trouble, Although I did spend every week trying to get out of sport, which I was pretty successful at. I wasn't very sport minded, but in my teens things seemed to unravel a bit, and I got very angry and didn't quite know why, and that lasted until I was about 40.
Okay.
And settled down. I married when I was about 24, or I got with my wife when I was about 24, and we've been together ever since. 66 now. We have 5 kids, 11 going on 12 grandkids. I was interested in family history, got involved in that. My wife's mother was fostered out, and her mother died when she was a young child, a toddler. And my wife asked if I'd find out where she came from. She didn't really know anything about it. She wasn't even sure what her mother's maiden name was. And anyway, after about a week, I found it all. Back in those days, white pages and that, and
Black and white?
Yeah, I knew she was born in Charters Tower, and I looked for this name that I thought she might have been, and there was no one in Charters Towers by that name, but I drew a line across the map to Townsville, and I said, I'll look up the white pages in Townsville, and found a cousin very quick, and they knew of her mother, and anyway, solved the lineage pretty quickly, So I thought, I'm pretty good at this. I should do this myself, So I dived head on into that, and my wife used to sit watching CSI, and she'd be saying to me, "What are you doing there?" Because I'd be on the computer. I'm going, "You're watching CSI." I said, "I'm doing it." So I ended up with, over a period of 12 to 14 years, I ended up with 13,500 people in my family tree, and I went with the parents to interstate to family tree reunions, both sides of the family, and I had a headstone remanufactured for the Irish convict ancestor, and I refurbished his grave out in Penrith, and put the headstone on it, refurbished the grave, and I organised a reunion of my own. Plus other people attended. We had Irish music and all that sort of stuff, and people come from interstate. Anyway, so I was interested in my oldest two grandchildren who had olive skin, and I knew a little bit of their father's history, but I wanted to know a bit more of where that came from. And we're watching TV one night, and my wife said, there was an ad on TV for Ancestry DNA, and she said, I'll just buy 3 of them. One for me, one for you, and one for our oldest grandchild. So I did that, and we spat in the tube and sat away and waited for the results, and I got the results back, and I knew nothing about DNA, had no idea how it worked. And they had a pie chart of your ethnicity, and at that time they had from thousands of years ago above the pie chart. So I just dismissed that pie chart. Okay, that was thousands of years ago.
Yep.
That's interesting. But, on the other side, you get to see the shared matches of other people that you're related to that have also done their DNA. And I didn't even know how that worked. I didn't realise that it went from the closest to the most distant. They were just people,
Wow.
My granddaughter was there, obviously, so I was related, the granddaughter. But there was another woman there, which turned out to be a very close match. And she contacted me through the messaging system in Ancestry. And she said, I grew up in an Italian family. I don't look like my mother and father. Oh, sorry, I'll take that back. I don't look like my brother and sister. Ever since I was 11 years old when my father died in 1982, they teased me that I was adopted. So she was concerned that she was adopted. And I was sympathetic, and I wanted to help find out where she fit in my family, and I couldn't narrow it down. It was, I'm thinking, is it a cousin on one side or uncle or something on the other side? I thought this was 2000, September 2000. I got the results. So in December, I brought parents' DNA kits, and anyway, they didn't actually do them until about February 2017, and about a week before they were due to come back in, I was looking around in the DNA and in my tree of 13,500 people, and I realised something didn't add up. There's no surnames in my DNA matches that I recognise. So I thought, I'll check my wife's DNA and her matches, and sure enough there were surnames there that I knew, because I knew this tree back to front, her tree as well. And so the wheels were starting to turn, and I googled where I was born. I'd done that many years before, and all I got was an image of an old building. So I googled the Salvation Army Bethesda Hospital, Marrickville, and up come all this information: forced adoption, government apology. And I went, what? One, I'd never heard of a government apology, and it was obvious, that I was adopted. And so basically I discovered I had 2 birth certificates. A lot of people don't realise when you're adopted, they cancel your real birth certificate, and they fabricate a fake one that says you're born to the adoptive parents. Obviously I wasn't born to them, they weren't at my conception, but this is what they do, and they still do it today. Nothing's changed. This archaic Adoption Act is still in force today. In fact, I'm still controlled by it today, and under the Act I'm still a child. Under the Adoption Act it says that the definition of a child is anyone under the age of 18 or anyone over the age of 18 who is adopted or is to be adopted. So I sit before you as a 66-year-old child. Peter Pan syndrome.
Wow.
I got a friend of mine who in South Australia. In South Australia, you can get a thing called an adoption discharge in Australia, which basically is close to but not exactly the same as an annulment. so you can get it reversed. And she went to court in New South Wales and Queensland. You have to go to the Supreme Court, which why you got supposed to prove that there was fraud, duress, or improper means. Which we had an apology in 21st of March 2013 by Julia Gillard, which apologised for this illegal practice. They admitted to fraud, duress, and improper means. But we've got to go to the Supreme Court and argue that in New South Wales and Queensland. In Victoria, you go to the county court and they actually assign you a case worker or manager to assist you to get that. In South Australia, you've got to go to the children's court. And this friend of mine went to the children's court, and when she arrived, they went, "So what child's case are you here for?" And she said, "I am the child." You would laugh about it. It's pretty sad that this is how we're treated.
It's disgusting.
And in Western Australia, you essentially make an application, and the judge rubber stamps it and grants it. So it's almost a no fault discharge. Like a no fault divorce. And it's one of my arguments is that we sorted out no fault divorce in 1975, and here we are 50 years later, and I'm not allowed to be granted a divorce. I've got to go and prove that there was a fraud, duress, or improper means. Just the way as they used to in divorce, you used to have to prove the infidelity, and I had an adopted uncle who at one time was working as a PI, crawling under people's houses, listening to pillow talk to get evidence. That's what happened, and we've got to gather evidence in the same way today to get our own discharge. So that's one of the things I'm passionate about is doing that. One of the other things that was glaring to me was on my original birth certificate when I got it was that there was my father's name wasn't on there. And what I found out since is that back in the day when they did all this, in this period, and the period somewhere between 1940 and 1980, but it moves around a bit. It's obviously happened before, it obviously still happened after that. But of the 50% of the women, single mothers, who a lot of them were young girls, were supported by their families. By and large, the father's name was on the birth certificate. But of the other 50% who were forced to give up their children, the father's names weren't on the birth certificate because they didn't want it to be on there. That was it. They might, put up a fight and might try and, get the adoption stopped. So they just didn't want them. And my mother told me, and I'll go back to the story about how I found my mum, but she told me that she wanted to put my father's name on there, and they told her if you put it on there, I'll be deemed a mixed race child, and I'll be deemed unadoptable, and I'll go to an orphanage. And which was true. I found some a report from I think 2000 I came across after she told me that, and I found a heading there, deferred adoptions, children with disabilities and of mixed race are deemed unadoptable and to go to orphanages. And mixed race, my father was Italian. My mother Aboriginal, Scottish heritage. It was a complete shock to me. I've been brought up in a white family, and and they talk about, some people like to argue about nature versus nurture. I don't think there's an argument between nature versus nurture. I think it's you get it from both sides, and who you associate with is who you mirror. And but you still have this genetic things, you know, that comes through that shapes you as well, that you can't change that, you know.
No.
You know, like they thought we were blank slates, you know, they'd remove us from our mother, and a lot of the women were drugged, tied down to the beds. They never saw the child. My mother refused to leave the hospital. She wasn't a young girl. She was, you know, well, she was young. She was in her early 20s, but she just refused to leave until she knew I wasn't in an orphanage, and because there was no way she was going to be able to take me home, and you know, and I thought I was with her for 6 weeks, but no, that wasn't true. She saw a glimpse of me when I was born, and the day I was adopted or taken by the adopted parents, she was told to go to the nursery, and she could lean through the window, and I'd be on the table on the other side of the window in the nursery, and she would dress me, and then when she finished dressing me, she had to go for a walk, and when she come back, I'd be gone. That in itself is a cruel act.
Oh yeah.
You know, but yeah, they thought we were blank slates, so we could be moulded, and you know, that's not right. We can't be moulded for that. It's you are what you are, and you know it, even if you don't know it. You know, I knew something wasn't right, but I couldn't put my finger on it. But, so going back to the DNA, that woman that I was helping, I realised at that point that she was in fact my sister, and I had 3 siblings on the Italian side and 5 on the Aboriginal side, my mum's side. I didn't know who my mum was at that stage when I found out, and I applied for an adoption certificate, and not knowing whether one existed or not, and I got one. I was told I was going to have to wait 7 or 8 months, and I went through an organisation, an NGO, that was funded by the government to help us do that. And after a month, I rang up and said, "What are you doing? I haven't heard from you." And they said, "Oh no, it's going to be another 7 or 8 months." I went, "No way, I'm not going to wear that." And I found my way to the Adoption Information Unit, which is a government department, you know, Communities and Justice now, was under docs at that time. And a very nice lady there said to me, "If you can get a doctor's certificate and saying that this is affecting your ability to function," which it was, "we might be able to speed it up. But we'll send you out a package of an information pack." And I got this doctor's certificate, and I wrote a 4-page letter and sent it in. And 5 days later, the information pack arrived. And I got in the morning, I had a look, and I thought, so much here, where do I start? I'm on my way to work. I work for myself then. I thought, I'll have a look at lunchtime. And lunchtime came, I looked again, I went, I don't know where to start. I'll just quickly have lunch and I'll finish the job and I'll look at it after work. And when I did that and looked at it after work, I was looking through it and I spotted a plastic sleeve. And I pulled the plastic sleeve out and there was the adoption certificate 5 days after I'd sent the information in. Not 9 or 10 months. So once I had my mother's name, and what I've been doing in the meantime is I learned about DNA, and I built a tree based on a couple of very distant cousins I found in my DNA who had extensive trees, and I figured that they had a common ancestor, and I figured they had a common ancestor, that was probably my common ancestor as well. So I was looking for an ancestral surname, and the surname I found was Trindle, which anyone in the Aboriginal community knows that Trindles are a prolific name, and that was basically because of 3 brothers who, or 3 of them, had Aboriginal partners. So I googled my mother's name, and trindle as soon as I got home, and within seconds, I say, it definitely wasn't minutes, I found a trindle tree blog from my brother naming my mother, my grandmother, and
Wow.
my great-grandfather.
Wow.
So I went to my trindle tree that I built, and I found a Robert Trindle, my great-grandfather. I didn't know whether I had the right Robert Trindle, but there was a Robert Trindle in my tree. It'll do for a starter, and turned out it was. And I put my grandmother's name under his and my mother's name under hers. And then I got hints of other people who had those names in their tree. And again, I found my brother. He had an ancestry account, and he was a genealogist. He had an extensive tree. And when I looked in his tree, I saw 2 brothers under a first marriage, a brother and 2 sisters under a second marriage. And when I looked closely, there was a fatherless child in between. And my wife was watching what I was doing, and she said, "That's you." I went, "I know." And she said, "You need to message him." I went, "I know." And I just messaged him and said, I'm looking for more information on that fatherless child in your tree. And what I didn't know was that my mother had had a mini stroke before Christmas of 2016, and had been concerned that she would have another stroke and she would lose her power of speech and her ability to find me, or her ability to tell anyone of my existence. So she confided, just 3 weeks before I contacted my brother, she confided in her oldest son and her husband of 55 years that I existed. So he knew my name, which is another thing. She shouldn't have known my name, but she did. And she said a woman in the hospital told her that my name, what my name would be. And she said, I always knew she shouldn't have done that, but I never understood why she did. I believe I know that, or knew that woman. My adopted family was Salvation Army, and 2 of his cousins worked there. So, from what I understand of that woman, that was, something that she would have done. If she felt that way. So, so when I contacted him, he knew exactly who I was, and he saw that message at 5 a.m. the following morning, and just after 5 that afternoon he rang me, and I was speaking to him, and he knew who I was, and my mother was waiting to hear from me, and I spoke to him for about an hour and a half, and gave him my mum's number, and
how was that conversation?
Well, I can only remember 2 things from it. The first one was, first words were, I was forced. I never wanted to give you up. And then later in the conversation, my wife kept saying to me, ask her who your father is. Now, I had a fair inkling who my father was, but I needed to hear it from her. And she repeated who my father was, and I went, yep, I know him, and he died in 1982. So that confirmed me. I could tell my sister then as well. My mother confirmed that our father's the same, one and the same.
So who was he?
He was Pasquale Capomola, and he was a Italian immigrant in Canberra, and he met another immigrant there and decided he wanted to start a hairdressing business. Basically a barber. He started out as a barber shop, and the guy that he started with was a guy named Francesco Calabria. Now, I met Francesco. I went to Canberra and met him, and because long story, I found him through trade, and I found a dissolution of partnership. I noticed in an old newspaper in 1960, and I googled his name and came up with a portrait of a series of portraits called Faces of Canberra. So I realised he was an identity. So him and my father started this business. You know, Francisco taught people the guitar and taught them how to dance. So he had clientele. My father, as he said, my father had the money. and my father was a barber, so he had the expertise. So together they started this business, and that business is still operating today. When I went and saw it in 2017, it was still operating in the same premises since 1956, and their clientele originally was parliamentarians, including Sir Robert Menzies and Arthur Calwell, the Prime Minister and the opposition leader, who, strangely enough, were great mates and were always seen together, and they went and got their hair cut together. So my mother worked for a wholesale liquor company, and she tells me that she knew my father for about 12 months, so a group of friends used to go out dancing. And so I was conceived in Canberra, and my grandfather, my mum came from Pilliga, and my grandfather was dying in 1958, and her mother convinced her to come home and help her look after the grandfather, and she had 2 older children. And when she told me she arrived at Canberra, at Pilliga, pregnant with me, I went, "So I've been to Pilliga?" And she said, well, yeah. I said, "So I was nearly born in Pilliga?" And she said, "No way, my mother wouldn't have it." I said, eventually I asked her how pregnant she was when she arrived there, and she was 8.5 months pregnant. And she said her mother bundled her in the car with her brother and sent me to Sydney to get rid of me. And she wasn't to tell my grandfather, but because she refused to come back, he obviously started asking questions, and he found out, and she said that he never forgave either of them for it, you know. So I wasn't born in Pilliga. I was born in Sydney, and life changed, and life changed again when I found out. You know, it was a roller coaster. A lot of emotions. You know, one minute I was elated that I had found this family, and then the realisation was that how much I'd lost. That I'd lost lost my father, I lost my mother, I lost my grandparents, I lost my siblings, I lost my cousins, I lost my uncles and aunts. You know, I lost all that, and nothing was going to replace that. And didn't matter how good a upbringing I had, it still wasn't going to replace that.
No way.
And because I lost my cultures, and I'm proud of all my cultures, and proud of what my dad did. He was quite successful in life, and in the short life he had, he died of cancer. He went back to Italy to die. He wanted to go back to his to the village he grew up in, and I went to that village. I had to go and see his grave. There was no ifs, buts about that. That was after. I'll come back to that, because I did have a reunion with my mum and my 5 siblings. 3 weeks after I spoke to my brother, I went to Queensland, and we had a reunion up there. And
How was that?
the reunion was great. And they're either great or they're not great, but it was great. But you can't get back everything's lost. And I would dearly love to have closer relations with my siblings than what I do, but I don't, because I would dearly love it, and that hurts that I don't, because I still don't belong. Don't belong in the Dotford family, which I became very disconnected with them, because 59 years of lies and deception, and realisation that it wasn't about me, it was about their own infertility problems, and Yeah, and I was never going to get an apology or any empathy about that because in their mind, I was theirs. There was no thought that I was someone else's and belonged somewhere else. I had that reunion, but I also, it was about 12 months after that, I was concerned or hesitant, worried about rejection on the Italian side because I'm not Catholic, I'm not anything, but I thought they might harbour some, conservative views or whatever, and I didn't know how I'd be accepted or not. And I got word back from my Italian sister that I was communicating with that the aunt in Italy didn't want to know anything about when she broached the subject. And I had another aunt in Sydney, and I figured, well, those two will talk and she'll have the same opinion. And I hadn't met my other brother and sister. I hadn't met any of them, in fact, at that stage. I'd spoken to this one, but I never actually met in person. And I thought, if I could possibly get the family to accept me, my chances of meeting my siblings would be much greater. And I knew from white pages, I think it was white pages, I found that there was some cousins in Sydney who were tradesmen, and I decided this day I was in Sydney that I would, later in the afternoon, I would go by one of the premises, or ring them at least, and make contact. And I just happened to find myself in the suburb in Sydney, in Bexley, and I thought, I'm in Bexley. I just drove past a house. I drove past a house and there was a van, tradesman's van, sitting on the driveway, and I thought, not at work. So I pulled around the corner and I rang the number. And I went, "Hey Tony, how you going, mate?" He went, "I'm going great, mate, how are you?" I said, I'm good. I'm your cousin you don't know." He went, "What?" I said, "I'm your cousin you don't know and I think we should meet." And he went, "Where are you?" I went, "I'm in Bexley." He said, "I'm in Bexley." I went, "Yeah, I know." He said, "But what, how?" I went, "Mate, long story." I said, "Do you want me to meet at your place or do you want me to meet at Bexley McDonald's?" He said, "Where are you?" I said, "I'm around the corner from you." He said, "I'll meet you at Macca's in 5. I went around Macca's and waited for him, and he came in. I started to tell him the story and he went, wow, I think we better sit down." And as my story unfolded, he said, "My father was very close to your father. Your father brought my father out from Italy to Canberra when he was 16 years old." What I didn't realise that that house wasn't Tony's house. It was his father's house. And his father was my first cousin and Tony was my second cousin. And he said to me, "Do you want to come round and meet Mum and Dad?" And I said, "It might be a bit of a shock for him." He said, "Yeah, but they'll get over it." So he said, "Follow me around." I had my tradesman's van, so I followed him around and I followed him up the drive. I got out and I walked into the courtyard as his father was coming out of the garage into the courtyard and his mother was coming out of the house into the courtyard. I reached out to his father and put a hand out and I shook his hand and went, "Buongiorno." And I reached out to his mother and I took her hand and went, "Buongiorno." And they started speaking to me in Italian. And Tony's jumped in and said, no, you don't understand. And so he started to explain to them in Italian who I was. And they're looking at him, they're looking at me, and I'm nodding my head going, "Yep, it's true." And his mum's a beautiful woman. Antonia, she invited me into the house. She said, "You come on inside." And sat me down at this big table. She said, "I make you coffee." I said, "Yeah, I have a coffee." Halfway through the coffee, she says, No, you have a beer." So I had coffee and beer, which I realise now is a bit of an Italian tradition. You have coffee and beer. It's like having a Red Bull and beer. Like halfway through a luncheon, they'll bring out the coffees. Yeah, it's a little bit traditional boost, So, I had a really good couple of hours there. But they did say to me, "You have a auntie who lives close by." I said, "Yeah, I know." They said, "Would you like to meet her?" I think it's up for you to decide. I don't. You know her, I don't, because I'm figuring on rejection. And eventually, she made the phone call. So I talked to her all the time. So they're laughing and joking, and then it went quiet. And I knew she didn't want me around there. And anyway, they're but things change. And I rang back a week later to see how the ring dictating. I said, I just wanted to see how things went, how the dust settled. And he said, "There's Fabio ring you." I went, "Who's Fabio?" Because I have a brother called Fabio. And he said, "No, it's your auntie's son. He wants to meet you. He wants to take you out for dinner." And I rang him and we got on like a house on fire. And eventually he organises a luncheon at his place on Easter Monday. And he asked me to invite my sister, and I ring her, and she was hesitant, whether she was going to come or not, and she had something on. And anyway, a few days before, she messaged me and asked me if it was still on, and I said yeah, and confirmed that she had got a personal invite. So I didn't hear any more from her either, and I arrived at my cousin's house for the luncheon, and my sister was there with her husband, so I got to meet my sister.
Wow.
But not only that, his mother was there, and we got on like a house on fire, and and then she was very kind to my granddaughter, because I went with my oldest granddaughter and my oldest daughter, and because my wife was working, and anyway, 7-hour luncheon, typical Italian lunch, and so that was a great day, and then the next day I get a phone call from a woman, and her first words are, "I'm going to shock you." I mean, "You're not going to shock me."
Mm-hmm.
She says, "I was your father's apprentice. I'm your cousin." She said, "I'm your cousin. I was your father's apprentice. I owe everything in my life to your father." And she said, "I didn't know about the luncheon. I would have been there. We have a luncheon in my place next week." So we had another 7-hour luncheon. And I keep in close contact with her. We get on really well, and she convinced me to contact my brother in Melbourne and a sister in London, and I contacted him, and I actually had to go down there and work, and I met up with him, and I met him at his work, and he came down the stairs. He's very tall.
Mm.
And I went, "Twins." Danny DeVito. I'm Danny DeVito. Yeah. And I was amazed how big he was. So we got on well, but we don't have that brotherly relationship that we should have had,
Mm.
And I went to Italy to visit my father's grave. There was no. It's like finding my mum. I would have, crawled across broken glass and to get to her door. There's nothing was going to stop me, and nothing was going to stop me going to Italy to see my father's grave. And I went there, and I had been in contact with a distant cousin in the north. My father comes from the south, from Calabria, but some of the family spread further north where work is and that. And I went to this cousin's house for dinner one night with his young family, and was sitting with them back to the wall, and a knock on the door, and all these people came in. And this woman, I stood up, and this woman made a beeline for me and grabbed my wrists very, very tightly and started speaking to me in Italian, but very emotionally. And, because I could feel the emotion, and her son was there, and he could speak a little bit of English, and he said, "She is welcoming you to the family."
Wow.
And that was a special moment. And I was using Google Translate, and I explained it. I said I was hoping to get my father's birth and death certificates when I was in Calabria. The next thing, she's on the phone to her sister in Calabria. She gets off the phone and she said, "They'll be waiting for you when you get there." And I thanked her and said, "I understand how hard they are to get." I've read, it's difficult to get them. She said, "No, we have an uncle. He's been the mayor of that town for 30 years. We'll get him." So when I got there, they were there, and I was expressed concern going into the village to this cousin who'd rang me and arranged a second luncheon, and her response was, "No. You just go to the first," because I said, I can't speak Italian. I'm in a strange village and people don't know me. And she said, no. She said, you just knock on the first door you come to. She said, they'll know who you are. She said, in fact, you see some kids on the street playing. She said, just go up to them, talk to them. They'll know who you are. And anyway, she was right. Everyone in the village knew me, and I got thinking about this. I've said this a lot of times. Just repeated this story of how I felt at peace there and felt very welcome. And I realised why my father wanted to go back there. That this was his mob. And this was what village life was, that everyone knew everyone and everyone looked after everyone, and that's why he went back there to die. So I don't understand straight away why he went back. And I could relate that to Aboriginal mob, and belonging there too. I've had an interesting journey, and I went in 2018, in March 2018, I got invited to the 5th anniversary of the National Apology for Forced Adoption, a luncheon at Parliament House, at New South Wales Parliament House. And this was 12 months after I found out, and I'd written a poem a few weeks earlier. I was driving home, and I just had to write a poem. And
What's the poem?
The poem was my story. I'd never been able to write 2 rhyming sentences when I was at school. Couldn't do it. But I had this thing in my head, I've got to write a poem and it's got to be rhyming, and I've got to do it when I get home. I just had to get this out. And I wrote 8 pages of rhyming poem. And I had this poem with me, and I wanted to give it to someone. I didn't know who to give it to, and there was a speaker on stage, another adoptee, and who was a lawyer, a PhD, and she came off the stage and immediately got surrounded by a lot of mothers of loss who wanted to meet her and talk to her. And I waited dutifully for my turn, and she said, "Why didn't you just push in like everyone else?" I said, "No." And I handed her the poem. And she put it in her bag. I went, oh, she didn't even read it. And a couple of days later, she contacted me and went, I just read your poem. She said, I want you to join my Facebook group, which I did. And within a couple of days, a guy in that Facebook group, a guy named William Hammersley, who eventually got his name back and through a discharge a month before he died. William Hammersley Ellis, he wanted to die as he was born, and he said to me, I want you to join this other Facebook group. He said, I'm starting a committee. He said, I want you on it. I knew nothing. I just followed, did what I was told, and joined this group, and ended up on this committee, and that was the start of Adoptee Rights Australia. And we're basically we're an advocacy group, but we're more than that. We're more than just advocate. We are benevolent. I speak to lots and lots of adoptees, ring me every week, and they can relate to someone who has gone through the same things as I have. It's very hard to explain to a non-adoptee just what it's like, but you can relate to other people who are what we call NPEs, people who find out that their fathers on the birth certificate is not their father that they grew up with. Donor conceived people got the same identity issues. Children from surrogates also have that identity issue,
So what was the reason for it?
For
For the forced adoption?
to solve infertility problems. And that they really shamed the women on the day that you don't deserve your child. We have these married couples who can't have children. They deserve it. You don't deserve it. And they would name shame them, degrade them. One of the early stories I read when I found out, there was a lot of information at the time which has been taken down by the National Archives, which I pleaded with them not to take it down. It was too valuable resource. But there was a young girl who told her story she was a young girl when it happened. I think she was 15, and her father took her to the police station because she refused to name the father of the child, and he punched her in the mouth in front of the police, and the police took her to Salvation Army Bethesda Hospital, and she tells of being on her hands and knees, very pregnant, scrubbing the floors, and someone there felt sorry for her and gave her a mop, and the matron came along and saw her with the mop and went, who gave her that mop? She's a sinner. She needs to be on her hands and knees before God. And she said she was 7 or 8 months pregnant, and this was some of the harsh treatment they got. But and, apart from the fact they drugged them and they tied them down the bed, they put up a pillow, put up a sheet so they couldn't see the birth. They would come in one door and the baby would go out another door. Sometimes they would tell them that the child has died. They're called rapid adoptions, and this was specifically to give couples who had had miscarriages a rapid replacement child. And all those mothers went away thinking the child had dead, thought they'd signed death certificate, but they folded the death certificate back and they were signing the paper underneath, which was the adoption certificate. And then to their shock, 30, 40 years later, someone would knock on the door and say, I think you're my mother. And I go, no, my child died. No, they didn't. And it was quite common. In fact, I'm speaking to a number of adoptees now who never legally adopted. The adopters want of a better word, just register them as their child. And there's no pathway for them to get their true identity back. You know, they should have a criminal investigation because they were kidnapped. Yeah. So it predominantly was infertility and illegitimacy. This is a way of there was an act come out in 1902, I think it was, the Illegitimacy Act, which allowed married couples to bring children who were born outside the marriage into the marriage as to legitimise them. Right? And that was the basis of the Adoption Act sort of came later, but after that. So this solving this illegitimacy was a thing. Well, we'll solve two problems at once. We'll make them legitimate, and we'll solve these people's infertility problem. So it's a win-win in their eyes. But of course it wasn't. It was just adding trauma on trauma. And I've been asked by journalists a number of times when I met my mother, did you have an instant bond? And I always said no. But now more I've realised, I understand why I didn't have an instant bond, is that when you're in vitro in the womb, at some point you become aware of your surroundings. You can hear the heartbeat, you're tactile, you can feel your environment, you can taste your environment, you can hear mother's voice, and you can hear other muffled voices, and smell. You know your mother's smell, and you also get a hormone. A woman produces a hormone called oxytocin, which prepares her body for childbirth, but it also calms the child in preparation for childbirth. And then when you're born and then you suckle, you get more oxytocin. But if, like me, you're just taken away, then your oxytocin supply is finished. Everything's severed. All the smells, the sounds, everything's gone. Put in a nursery with a dozen other crying kids and different people handling you. So you then produce hormone of your own. You produce cortisol, which is your flight, fear, anxiety. So you've got this heightened anxiety and you can't verbalise it because you're non-verbal. So my answer when I'm asked that in the future is, what do you mean maternal bond? What's that like? Because I don't know what it is. I never had it.
No.
Mine was severed before it was completed, and it sort of makes sense why I didn't understand. I just knew no, I didn't, and I didn't have it with the adopted mother either. I used to feel guilty, I think I might have been watching Maxwell Smart or something, and he's laying on the psychiatrist's couch, and they said, "Do you hate your mother?" And I thought about it. I went, I don't hate her. I don't love her like I think I should. I feel guilty about that.
Yeah.
But that's what it was. She wasn't my mother. I didn't have that maternal. There was no maternal bond. There's no connection.
So how was it with your adopted parents? Did you ever go to them and be like,
Yeah. Well,
why didn't you tell me?
Okay, so I connected with my mum on the Thursday night, Thursday afternoon before Mother's Day 2017. And when I got that information, I said about getting that adoption certificate, the first person I rang was my adopted sister, who didn't believe. I'd already told her, but she didn't believe the DNA.
No.
And she's a world-renowned professor of medicine. Recently, she's been I don't know what the word is, but she's one of that recognises
One of the top.
Well, in the top 2% of scientists in the world. Right? So we're totally different. we could have been worlds apart, but
Still didn't believe you.
but she wouldn't believe it's commercial DNA. I've got friends of mine, professors of genetics. Will you do a DNA test with me? Yeah. And I rang up and said, hold everything. I have the adoption certificate. It's got their names on it. Because they never flinched. When I gave them DNA kits, and when they did the test, and I went and said, I didn't tell them that we weren't like, I already worked that out before their results came in. But they never flinched. I told them, oh yeah, you're English and that, and, you're Irish. And I was waiting for something. There's nothing. It made me question, like how could they not know? And I thought about rapid adoption. It was a rapid adoption. Did they not know that I wasn't their child? I couldn't explain it. It was just poker face.
Yep.
But they were aged, and my adopted sister said, well, there's one more thing you got to do. I said, what's that? She said, we need to tell them that you know. She said, do you want to do it or you want me to do it? I said, you can do it. So she went and saw him the day before Mother's Day and told him that I knew. And I didn't ring him up, I didn't have a conversation. But my adopted sister and her husband were going to take him out for lunch on Mother's Day, and they arranged that I would get there just before they did. So I turned up, walking on eggshells, a bunch of flowers, and I came through the door, and first words to me when I came from the door from the adopted father was, you saved our marriage. You were always ours. We burnt the paper. We burned the papers when you were a teen. You're always ours. And that took me back a bit, but okay, not what I wanted to hear, but keep going. So I explained to him how I made the discovery. And by this time, my sister and her husband came in, and I got to the part where I said, I'm going to Queensland, Gold Coast to reunite with my mum and my siblings in 3 hours' time. To which the adopted mother said, I want to go. And I didn't want her to go. And I still didn't know how to say it. I'm still, luckily my sister, she's very forthcoming and said, no, it's Peter's journey, he needs to do it alone.
Yeah.
And I'm, in her debt for that. And to which she retorted, but you said she had a stroke. What if she dies and I don't get to meet her?
You got to get there.
And I'm thinking, hang on a minute, you're taking this to your grave. I never got to meet my father. He died before I could get to meet him. And you weren't worried about me not meeting my mother, and you're worried about you not meeting my mother? I just want out of here. And my sister read the room and said, I think it's time we went to lunch. And I wasn't ever going to lunch with her. So I made my escape. But I never felt comfortable going back to the house. It's because it was just a reminder, looking around at the trinkets and things and stuff, it was just a reminder to me of the lies and deception of 59 years. And I never got over that. They're both past now, but the relationship was never the same. I think it's a case of the people you think you can trust the most, you find out you can't trust them. It's why it is. People they say things with the best intention, but but isn't but they raise you. Hang on, you can't tell me how I feel. It's how I feel is how I feel. I can't change that.
Oh.
I just got to play it how I feel, and that's it. I can't do anything about it.
So you had the catch up with your adopted parents. You leave and you're off to Queensland.
Yes, I went to Queensland. Yeah.
What was that like when you?
The first meeting. Yes.
Uh-huh.
My mum and her husband, and he was a lovely guy. He accepted me, but they lived in a unit in a over 55s, and there was a meandering pathway up there, and my daughter, my wife, my daughter, and my granddaughter was with me,
Oh wow.
and I couldn't stop myself. I was really anxious, but also excited, and I got ahead of them.
You're in there.
I got 4 or 5 steps ahead of them to the door because we could see them through the blinds.
So you had to get there.
I had to get there and knock the door. My mother met me at the door, and she just said, "I just want to hold you and look at you." And my daughter took a photograph of that moment, which I'm indebted to her for doing that. It was priceless, and and I've got that photo. But
so she said she wanted to hold you.
she didn't want to hold, just wanted to look at me. And so we did. We just stood there looking at each other. Yeah.
Amazing.
And then we were going out for dinner with them and meeting with my oldest brother and his family.
No, go back.
Yeah.
Tell me everything that you remember. She started holding you, and then what?
I don't remember. I just remember her holding me. And then, of course, we moved in. She introduced me to her husband and my wife, and I introduced her to the wife and my daughter and granddaughter, and he was, I guess he was nearly 90 at that stage, and he said, "I'll lead the way in driving." Look, I'm a leadfoot, but I had trouble keeping up with him. It was amazing. I'm thinking, I hope you know where the radars are. And we went out and had this big meal at a
Wow, that's beautiful.
a big restaurant, and I had my oldest brother. I only had him for 3.5 years. I didn't realise how sick he was when I met him, how unwell he was. And I had my mum for 5 years. Both of them had diabetes and kidney failure and associated things. And
what was the conversation with Mum?
I can't remember. I don't remember. It was, but we just built a relationship. I used to go up there and stay, and a younger brother used to go and stay at his place, and then I'd stay at Mum's, and her husband he passed away in the middle of COVID, but so I'd spend 3 or 4 days at her place and just hang out. And she'd take me and introduce me to her friends. She'd take me out to tea at the village, the over 55s, and I got to know her friends, and they all got to know me. So it was we made the best of it. I can't say it was perfect, but it wasn't. It was good, and so I went up when I found out she decided not to take dialysis anymore, and I knew that was the end. So I raced up there and I spent 2 weeks at her bedside every day until she lost. I went in and she'd lost consciousness, and the doctor came in and said she can't die today. I went, I figured that, and I had to get back. I've been up there 2 weeks. I had to get back. So I left, and about an hour and a half later, I got a message from my brother rang me and said she passed away. But I did what I could. There's always questions I never got to ask. I forgot. Probably because I was a bit personal, and
the biggest thing has been completed. You did it. You did it.
Yeah. My not all my kids got up to see her, but my son, his best mate was Aboriginal, and his mum's an elder in the local West Lakes Aboriginal Elders group, and we'd known him and known her as I'd grown up, and I didn't know. She used to say to him, "You're Aboriginal," and he said, "No, I'm not." She said, "Yes, you are. I can tell. You're Aboriginal." And she keeps saying it. Her son would say, "Mum, you shut up, will you? He's not Aboriginal. Just leave him alone." She said, "He is. I can tell." And of course, when I found out, I gave him a printout that I got off the internet of our family tree with Trindle on it, and he was going to see his mate pass out at Puckapunyal, and he was travelling down with his parents, and he gave her the family tree, and she took one look at it and went, "I always knew you," and anyway, I couldn't have convinced him to go and see my mum. But she did. She told him, "What do you mean you haven't met your grandmother? You get up there and meet her and you ask her all the questions you can about her family history and everything, And so one Friday night, my son turned up with his wife and went, "We're going to the Gold Coast to meet your mum tomorrow." Well, how the flew? He said, "I spoke to Daniela and she told me I have to do it." And they had a good time. I've got another daughter who lives in Queensland, and they all met together, and apparently they had a really, really good day. I'm glad he did that. I'm sure he's glad he did it as well. But,
Wow. What a beautiful story. Heartbreaking, but beautiful story. And I just want to say thanks for sharing that story, Pete.
No worries, no.
That was
my pleasure. I like to educate people as to, and there's a lot of people in my same situation. Some had it, I would say worse than I have, but and a lot of people, suffer in silence. I speak to adoptees every week. I've never spoken to an adoptee before, and I speak to them for 2 or 3 hours.